How can you be a university student and still work two jobs in a day? I do it because I have to.
She scrubbed toilets at midnight and sat in the front row of her lecture hall by 8 a.m. Nobody knew both things were the same girl until the day someone found out and tried to destroy her with it. But here's what nobody saw coming. The secret wasn't hers to be ashamed of. It belonged to the very people laughing at her. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why they say be careful who you mock. You never know whose hands are quietly building the future you'll beg to be part of. If stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button now, because this one is going to shake you. Her name was Nkechi Obiora, 19 years old, second child of a family that used to mean something in Enugu before everything fell apart in a single quiet afternoon nobody saw coming. Before the fall, Chief Obina Obiora owned one of the busiest transport and logistics companies in the East. Trucks with his name painted boldly on the sides moved goods from Onitsha to Lagos, from Aba to Kano. Neighbors called him Oga Truck. He built a house with white pillars on Independence Layout. He sent his children to good schools. He was, by every visible measure, a man who had made it. Then, one rainy August, it all disappeared. Not slowly, not gradually. In the space of 6 weeks, the company's accounts were frozen, the trucks were seized by banks, and Chief Obina's name, a name that once opened doors, became a name people whispered about with pity and some with satisfaction. Nkechi was 14 when it happened. She remembers her father sitting at the dining table with his head in his hands, papers scattered everywhere. Her mother standing by the window, not saying a word, just staring outside like she was waiting for the rain to explain something. Nobody explained anything to Nkechi. Not then, not for years. What she knew was this. Overnight, the white-pillared house was gone. The school fees stopped. Her father's health collapsed along with his business. The doctors called it stress-induced heart failure. But Nkechi always felt it was something deeper, something that ate a man from inside when his name was dragged through mud he didn't create. By the time Nkechi gained admission into university 5 years later, her father was a shadow of the man in the old photographs. Her mother, Mama Ifeoma, sold groundnut and boiled corn on the roadside to keep food on the table. And Nkechi, bright, sharp, the girl who scored the second highest result in her entire set in WAEC, had to find her own way to survive university because there was no one to carry her. So she carried herself. By 5 a.m., before the sun fully rose over Nsukka, Nkechi was already at Mama Rosaline's bakery, kneading dough with hands that would later that same day hold a pen and take notes on microeconomics. By 9 p.m., long after her classmates had gone to sleep or gone to parties, Nkechi was at Sunrise Hotel, clearing tables, washing plates, sometimes mopping floors that reeked of spilled beer and cheap perfume, her uniform blouse from lectures still creased underneath her apron. 2 jobs, 1 girl, barely 4 hours of sleep most nights. She told no one at school, not because she was ashamed of hard work, she wasn't, but because she had learned, painfully, that some people don't respect struggle, they mock it. And in her department, there was one person in particular who was always looking for something to mock. Her name was Chiamaka Duru. Now, before you assume you already know where this story is going, that this is just another tale of a mean rich girl versus a poor hardworking girl, hold on, because Chiamaka Duru is not who you think she is, not even close. And by the time this story ends, you'll realize the real villain was never in that lecture hall at all. Chiamaka arrived at the University of Nigeria Nsukka in a black Toyota Prado, driven by a man in a black suit who called her Madame, even though she was barely 20. She wore designer bags to lectures. Her weave alone, students whispered, cost more than most people's semester fees. Her father, Chief Emeka Duru, was a name that circulated in Enugu business circles with a certain reverence, A real estate mogul, they said. A man who multiplied his wealth in less than a decade. Chiamaka had a way of making people feel small without raising her voice. She didn't need to shout. A single glance, a smirk, a comment dropped just loud enough to be heard. That was her weapon. And Nkechi, with her worn sandals and her second-hand textbooks held together with sellotape, was an easy target. Is that the same blouse from Monday? Chiamaka asked, one Wednesday morning, loud enough for the whole class to hear, her friends giggling behind her. Nkechi said nothing. She simply opened her notebook and began writing. I heard she works as a waitress, someone whispered, not quietly enough, at Sunrise Hotel. My cousin saw her there, serving drinks to men. The class erupted in muffled laughter. Nkechi's pen didn't stop moving, but her hand trembled slightly, the ink smudging on the page. That should have been a small, forgettable moment. Just teenage cruelty, the kind that happens in every classroom in the world. But it wasn't, because Chiamaka Duru had just planted a seed, a rumor that would grow into something far bigger than a schoolyard joke. And somewhere far away, someone was about to hear that rumor and recognize a name they hadn't heard in 5 years. Now here's where it gets interesting. Stay with me, because what happens next is not what you expect. That evening, as usual, Nkechi walked the 20-minute stretch from her hostel to Sunrise Hotel, her uniform folded carefully in a nylon bag so it wouldn't crease before her shift. Along the way, she passed a small kiosk where a man named Baba Sunday sold recharge cards and sachets of pure water. He always greeted her the same way.
Moi, ye dey try today? I dey manage, Baba, she'd reply, forcing a smile. But that particular evening, Baba Sunday said something different, something that stopped her mid-step. Somebody dey find you, a man. He come here yesterday. They ask if I know one Nkechi, wey be daughter of Chief Obiora. Nkechi's chest tightened. Nobody used her father's old title anymore, not in years. Which man? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I no know am. He no talk much, but he leave him number. Say make I give you if I see you. He handed her a small folded paper. Nkechi stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into her pocket, her mind racing. Who would be looking for her using her father's forgotten title? A debt collector? Someone from the old company days? Or worse, someone connected to whatever had truly destroyed her father 5 years ago? A truth she had never been given. She didn't call the number that night. She was too afraid of what she might hear. Instead, she went to work, plastered on a tired smile, and served table after table, her mind elsewhere entirely. It was almost 11 p.m. when the second strange thing happened. A woman, elegant, maybe in her 50s, wearing a wrapper of expensive asoke and gold earrings that caught the dim hotel light, sat alone at table 7 and ordered a bottle of Chapman. When Nkechi bought her drink, the woman looked at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. What's your name? Nkechi ma. Nkechi what? Something about the question felt different from the usual small talk customers made. Nkechi hesitated. Obiora ma. The woman's expression changed, just slightly. Just enough for someone paying close attention to notice. Her eyes softened, then almost immediately hardened again, as if she'd caught herself feeling something she didn't want to feel. You are Obina's daughter, the woman said. It wasn't a question. Nkechi's hands went cold around the serving tray. You knew my father. The woman didn't answer directly. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a crisp 5,000 naira note, and placed it on the table, far more than the drink cost. Keep the change, she said, standing abruptly. And Nkechi, be careful who you trust in that school of yours. Not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. Some people's fathers owe your father more than money. And then she walked out, leaving Nkechi standing frozen by the table, her heart hammering, 1,000 questions exploding in her mind at once. If you're feeling that chill right now, That sense that something bigger is happening beneath the surface? Good, because it is. And I promise you, this story is only just beginning. If you don't want to miss where this goes, make sure you're subscribed, because the next part changes everything. For the next few weeks, Nkechi tried to push the encounter out of her mind. She called the number Baba Sunday gave her 3 times. It rang out every time. No response, no callback, just silence, like the number belonged to a ghost. Meanwhile, school became harder. Chiamaka's mockery escalated from whispered comments to something more calculated. She started a group chat. Nkechi found out about it by accident when a classmate named Ebuka, one of the few genuinely kind people in her department, accidentally forwarded a screenshot to her instead of the intended group. The chat was called Nsukka Elites. In it, Chiamaka had posted a blurry photo of Nkechi in her hostel uniform, taken secretly by someone who had recognized her at Sunrise Hotel. The caption read, "Meanwhile, some people are studying." Beneath it, dozens of laughing emojis, comments mocking her clothes, her hostel room, even her father. Ex-billionaire's daughter don't turn waitress. Nkechi read every single comment. Her hands shook so badly that she had to set her phone down. Ebuka, realizing his mistake, immediately called her. "Nkechi, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to send that to you. Please." "It's fine," she said, though her voice cracked. "Thank you for telling me the truth, at least." That night, for the first time in 5 years, Nkechi allowed herself to cry, really cry, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and old, not just about the group chat, but about everything. Her father's illness, her mother's roadside table, the white pillared house that was now someone else's, the dreams she'd buried under exhaustion just to survive. But here's the thing about Nkechi Obiora that Chiamaka and her friends never understood. Pain, for her, was never the end of the story. It was always fuel. The next morning, she went to class as usual. She sat in the front row as usual. When Chiamaka smirked at her, Nkechi looked her dead in the eye, calm, unshaken, and said nothing. Not out of weakness, out of strategy. Because Nkechi had decided something the night before, somewhere between her tears, that she will not fight Chiamaka with words. She would fight her with results, with silence that unsettled, with excellence that couldn't be mocked away. But what Nkechi didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the story was already moving in a direction none of them controlled. Because that woman at table 7, the one with the gold earrings and the mysterious warning, was not a stranger passing through. She was Chiamaka Duro's mother.
Let that sink in for a second. The woman who told Nkechi to be careful who she trusted in school was the mother of the very girl bullying her. Now, why would Mrs. Duru say something like that? Why would she recognize the Obiora name with such heaviness, such guilt in her eyes? To understand that, we need to go back 5 years to the real story behind Chief Obiora's collapse. A story that had nothing to do with bad luck and everything to do with betrayal. Here's what actually happened. 5 years earlier, Chief Obina Obiora had a business partner, a man he trusted completely. They had grown up together in the same village, attended the same secondary school, built their fortunes side by side. That man's name was Emeka Duru, Chiamaka's father. Together, Obiora and Duru had co-invested in a massive contract, a logistics deal with a state government worth hundreds of millions of naira. Obiora, as the more established name, fronted most of the capital and put his company's assets as collateral. Duru, newer to serious wealth, needed the partnership to legitimize his rising real estate ambitions. But when the government contract hit turbulence, a change in administration, a review of past deals, an investigation into contract padding, someone needed to take the fall. And Emeka Duru, using contacts Obiora didn't know he had, quietly redirected the evidence, the paper trail, all of it to point toward Obiora alone. He walked away clean, untouched. His name never appeared in a single newspaper article about the scandal. Obiora's accounts were frozen, his trucks seized, his name dragged through headlines. Transport mogul's empire collapses amid fraud allegations. He was too heartbroken, too betrayed, too consumed by illness to even mount a proper legal defense. And in the chaos, in the desperation, he never once suspected that the betrayal had a face he knew, a face he remembered from happier years. Emeka Duru took his share of the profits built partly on Obiora's ruined name, and used it to expand into real estate. Within 3 years, he was one of the wealthiest men in Enugu. His daughter grew up in comfort, built on a foundation she knew nothing about. But his wife knew. Mrs. Duru had never approved of what her husband did. For years, she carried the guilt quietly, watching her husband's empire grow, while somewhere a family she once knew fell into ruin. When she recognized Nkechi's face at that hotel table, a face that carried unmistakable traces of a man she remembered from happier years, something in her broke. That's why she left the money. That's why she gave the warning. Because on some level, Mrs. Duru knew her own daughter, cruel and careless with her privilege, was mocking a girl her own family had helped destroy. Now, pause here for a second, because this is exactly the kind of twist I told you was coming. This is why I said, don't assume you know where this story is going. The bully isn't the true villain here. Her father is, and the bully doesn't even know it. If this is blowing your mind a little, drop a comment telling me what you think happens next. And don't forget to subscribe, because we are far from finished. Weeks passed. Nkechi buried herself in her books and her jobs, determined to let her results speak where her mouth stayed silent. But fate, as it often does, was quietly rearranging the pieces behind the scenes. One evening, a new part-time worker joined Sunrise Hotel, a middle-aged man named Mr. Anoseke, hired as the new accounts supervisor. Quiet, observant, always polite to the staff in a way most supervisors weren't. Nkechi liked him immediately, though she couldn't say why. One night, after a long shift, Mr. Anoseke approached her as she was untying her apron. "Nkechi, that's your surname, correct?" he said. Nkechi froze, the same way she had with Mrs. Duru. "Yes, sir. Why?" "I used to work for your father," he said low, almost reverently. "Chief Obinna Obiora, best boss I ever had. Fair man, honest man." He paused, studying her face. "I heard what happened to him. Everybody in Enugu business circles heard, even if nobody talks about it plainly. I always wondered what became of his children." Nkechi's throat tightened. "He's not well, sir. My mother sells food by the roadside now. I'm the only one who can still push through school." Mr. Anoseke was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would change everything. "Your father didn't fall because of fraud, Nkechi. I was there. I saw the papers before everything got rearranged. Somebody set him up. I always suspected who, I just never had proof." Nkechi's whole body went still. "Who?" Mr. Anoseke hesitated, glancing around the empty hotel lobby as if the walls themselves might be listening. "I can't say for certain, not without proof, but I still have some of the old documents, copies I made before I left the company back when things started feeling wrong. I kept them because I had a feeling someday they'd matter." "Where are they?" "At my house. I'll bring them." But Nkechi, his voice dropped even lower. "Be careful who you talk to about this. If I'm right about who did this, that person is very powerful now and very dangerous to cross." That night, Nkechi didn't sleep at all. She lay on her thin mattress in her cramped hostel room, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning through possibilities. Someone had deliberately destroyed her father, and that someone was still out there, wealthy, respected, untouched, while her family suffered the consequences of a crime they never committed. For the first time in years, something other than exhaustion kept Nkechi awake. It was hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. 3 days later, Mr. Anoseke didn't show up for his shift, or the day after. When Nkechi asked the hotel manager, she was told awkwardly that he had resigned suddenly and relocated. No forwarding address, no explanation. Nkechi's stomach dropped. Someone had gotten to him, or scared him off, or worse. She tried calling the number he'd given her. Disconnected. For a week,
Nkechi felt like she was chasing a ghost that had briefly appeared just to remind her of a truth she couldn't yet prove. She threw herself back into survival. Bakery, lectures, hotel, repeats, trying to convince herself that maybe it had all been a misunderstanding. Maybe Mr. Anosike had simply moved on for personal reasons. But deep down, she knew better. Meanwhile, back on campus, the bullying didn't stop. If anything, it grew worse. Chiamaka, emboldened by the silence of a girl who refused to fight back with words, escalated. She began spreading a new rumor that Nkechi wasn't just a waitress, but something far more scandalous, something Chiamaka fabricated entirely out of cruelty, insinuating things about the kind of extra services girls like Nkechi provided at hotels. The rumor spread like wildfire. Whispers followed Nkechi through the hallways. Some lecturers, unfortunately, even seemed to treat her differently, their eyes lingering with judgment they never voiced but clearly felt. It was during one such lecture, a 300-level economics class, that everything came to a head. Dr. Nnamdi Eze, a strict but fair lecturer known for his sharp tongue, had assigned a research project worth 30% of the semester grade. Groups were formed randomly. By cruel coincidence, or perhaps fate's twisted sense of humor, Nkechi was placed in the same group as Chiamaka. The tension was immediate. Chiamaka barely looked at her during the first meeting, delegating all the difficult sections to Nkechi, while she and her friends did the bare minimum. Nkechi, exhausted from her double life, but unwilling to let her grades suffer, did the work anyway, most of it in fact, staying up even later than usual, sacrificing sleep she desperately needed. On the day of submission, disaster struck. Chiamaka, in a moment of carelessness, or perhaps something far more deliberate, submitted an outdated draft instead of Nkechi's final polished version, one riddled with unfinished sections and errors. When Dr. Nnamdi Eze called the group forward to explain the shoddy work, Chiamaka, without hesitation, threw Nkechi under the bus. "It's her fault, sir," Chiamaka said smoothly, gesturing at Nkechi. "She was supposed to compile everything. I don't know what happened." Nkechi felt the room's eyes on her. Dozens of students, some sympathetic, most simply curious, waiting to see how she'd respond. Her chest burned with the injustice of it. She had the correct file. She had proof. But in that moment, something in her, years of exhaustion, years of swallowed pain, years of being underestimated, finally cracked. "That's not true," Nkechi said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. She pulled out her phone, opened her email, and turned the screen toward Dr. Nnamdi. "I sent the completed version to the group chat 2 days ago, sir. Time-stamped. Everyone in this group can confirm it." Dr. Nnamdi took his phone, scrolled through the timestamps, his expression hardening. He looked up at Chiamaka, who had gone visibly pale. "Miss Duru," he said slowly, "would you like to explain why you submitted an incomplete file when a completed one was available?" Chiamaka stammered, glancing at her friends for backup that didn't come. I must have grabbed the wrong file, sir. It was a mistake." "A mistake," Dr. Nnamdi repeated flatly. He was quiet for a moment, studying both girls. Then he said something that would ripple far beyond that classroom. "I've been lecturing in this department for 11 years. I've watched students like you, Miss Duru, coast through on privilege, while students like Miss Obiora work twice as hard for half the recognition. I know exactly what's been happening in this class, the whispers, the mockery. I chose to stay silent because I believed young people should learn to handle their own conflicts. But I will not stay silent about academic dishonesty." He turned to the class. "Miss Obiora's group score will reflect her actual submitted work. Miss Duru, you and I will be having a separate conversation about integrity." The classroom was dead silent. For the first time in months, Nkechi felt something like vindication. Small but real. But vindication, as it turns out, is never the end of the story. Because that very evening, something happened that would connect every thread of this story together. The betrayal, the bullying, the mysterious warning, all of it in a way nobody, not even Nkechi, could have predicted. Stay close. This is the part you don't want to miss. If you've made it this far, you clearly love a good story. So go ahead and subscribe right now, because what happens next changes everything you thought you understood about this family. That evening, shaken and humiliated in front of the entire department, Chiamaka went home in tears. Genuine tears, not the performative kind she used to manipulate sympathy. She stormed into her father's study, where Chief Emeka Duru sat behind his mahogany desk reviewing property documents. "Daddy, do you know what happened to me today?" she demanded, and proceeded to recount the entire humiliation, leaving out, of course, her own role in causing it. Chief Emeka Duru, mildly irritated at being interrupted, asked the girl's name. "Obiora," she spat. "Nkechi Obiora, some scholarship-chasing hustler who works as a waitress and thinks she's better than everyone." The color drained from Chief Emeka's face. "What did you say her name was?" "Obiora." "Why? Do you know her family?" Chief Emeka stood up slowly, his hands trembling slightly, a reaction his daughter had never seen from him before, not once in her entire life. Chief Emeka Duru was a man known for his composure, his unshakable confidence in every business meeting, every social gathering. But at the mention of that name, something ancient and guilty rose to the surface. "Leave me," he said quietly. "Daddy, leave me, Chiamaka, now." Confused and unsettled, Chiamaka left the study, but she didn't go far. She lingered outside the door, curiosity overpowering her, and heard her father on the phone, his voice low and urgent. "I don't care how. Find out everything about the Obiora girl. Everything. And find Anosike. He worked for Obina years ago. I heard he resurfaced somewhere in Nuska. I need to know what he knows and what he's told anyone."
Chiamaka's blood ran cold. Why would her father need to track down some old employee connected to a broke, disgraced family? Why the sudden panic over a girl she'd been mocking for months? That night, unable to sleep, Chiamaka did something she had never done before. She went digging. She searched her father's old files, old emails, anything that might explain his reaction. Most of it was locked, encrypted, inaccessible to her. But in an old dusty box in the storage room, the kind of box people forget exists, she found a folder of yellowed documents from nearly 6 years ago. Contracts, bank statements, and one document in particular that made her stomach drop. A signed memo dated just weeks before the collapse of Obiora Logistics, reallocating liability for the government contract entirely onto O. Obiora, with a signature that was unmistakably her father's, dated and notarized just days before the fraud investigation went public. Chiamaka sat on the dusty floor of that storage room for nearly an hour, the document trembling in her hands, piecing together a truth too heavy for her to fully process at once. Her father, the man who built their mansion, their cars, their entire lifestyle, had done this, had ruined a family, a business partner, a friend, and let that man's children pay the price in poverty and humiliation, while Chiamaka herself mocked the very girl her family had wronged. For the first time in her life, Chiamaka Duru felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel: shame. Real, gut-wrenching shame. Now, here is where I want you to really pay attention, because this is the turning point of everything. What Chiamaka does next will determine whether this story ends in more cruelty or in redemption. And trust me, what she chooses to do will surprise you. For nearly 2 weeks, Chiamaka said nothing. She avoided Nkechi in class, no longer mocking her but not apologizing either, simply retreating into a strange, unreadable silence that confused everyone who knew her, including her own friends. Meanwhile, Nkechi's situation was quietly worsening. Her mother's health had begun to decline. Years of standing under the sun selling groundnut had taken its toll, and a persistent cough had turned into something the local clinic couldn't properly diagnose without expensive tests they couldn't afford. Her father's condition remained fragile, and on top of it all,
Final year project fees, exam fees, and hostel rent all converged at once, a financial storm Nkechi didn't know how she'd survive. She began taking on extra shifts at the hotel, sometimes working until 2 a.m., then waking 5 a.m. for the bakery, surviving on almost no sleep, running purely on desperation and willpower. Her course-mates noticed her growing thinner, hollow-eyed, but few said anything. Ebuka, her one true friend in the department, tried to help where he could, sharing his notes, covering for her when she dozed off in class from exhaustion, but even he couldn't fix the deeper crisis. Then, one Thursday afternoon, everything came to a head. Nkechi received a call in the middle of a lecture, something she never allowed herself to do, but the caller ID showed her neighbor back home, and neighbors only called during emergencies. She stepped out, hands shaking. "Nkechi, your mama don't faint in a market. Them don't rush am go hospital. Come quick, it's serious." Nkechi didn't remember leaving the lecture hall. She didn't remember the taxi ride to the park or the bus journey home. 4 hours that felt like 4 days. All she remembered was arriving at the small general hospital in Enugu, finding her mother on a worn hospital bed, an IV drip in her arm, her father, himself barely strong enough to walk, sitting beside her, his face carved with a grief so deep it seemed to have aged him another decade in a single afternoon. The doctor's words landed like blows. Severe anemia, complicated by an untreated respiratory infection that had gone unmanaged for months because they simply couldn't afford proper care. She needed to be admitted immediately. She needed medication, transfusions, tests, money Nkechi did not have. Nkechi stood in that hospital corridor, her entire body trembling, and for the first time since her father's empire collapsed 5 years earlier, she felt truly, completely broken. All the strength she had built, brick by brick, the 2 jobs, the silent dignity in the face of mockery, the refusal to give up, all of it seemed to crumble in that sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway. She sat on a plastic chair outside the ward and cried the way a person cries when they have nothing left to hold themselves together. It was in that lowest moment, that rock-bottom moment, that her phone buzzed with a WhatsApp message from a number she didn't recognize. The message read, "I know what happened to your father. I know it wasn't his fault. I'm sorry for everything I've done to you. Please don't ask me how I got your number. Just tell me, how much do you need for your mother's treatment? I'm sending help, no strings attached." Nkechi stared at the message, confused, suspicious, wondering if this was some cruel prank. She typed back cautiously, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who owes your family more than you know. Please, just tell me the amount. I promise this isn't a joke." Something about the tone, desperate, genuine, laced with something like guilt, made Nkechi trust it, even against her better judgment. She typed the hospital bill amount, her hands shaking. Within 20 minutes, an alert buzzed on her mother's old phone, which Nkechi had borrowed to make emergency calls. A bank transfer, the exact amount plus extra for medication. Nkechi sat frozen, staring at the screen, tears streaming down her face, tears of relief this time, mixed with confusion. Who was helping her, and why now at the exact moment she needed it most? You might already suspect who sent that message, but hold on, because the truth behind it is more complicated and more emotional than you think. Before we get there, let me remind you, if you felt even a fraction of what Nkechi felt in that hospital hallway, you understand why stories like this matter. Subscribe now, because the next few minutes bring everything full circle. It was Chiamaka. After discovering the documents in her father's storage, after days of guilt eating away at her, Chiamaka had quietly done her own digging, hiring a private investigator with her own allowance money, someone who tracked down Nkechi's family situation, her mother's declining health, the true extent of what her father's betrayal had cost the Obiora family. When she learned about the hospital emergency through the investigator who'd been monitoring the situation, Chiamaka didn't hesitate. She transferred the money from her personal account, an account funded by an inheritance from her late grandmother, money that had nothing to do with her father's tainted wealth. It was, in her mind, the only clean money she had to offer.
But Chiamaka wasn't ready to reveal herself yet. Not until she understood the full truth. Not until she decided what she was going to do about her father. Over the following 2 weeks, as Mama Ifeoma recovered in the hospital, funded by the mysterious anonymous sender, Nkechi noticed something strange happening at school. Chiamaka's demeanor had completely shifted. The mockery stopped entirely. The group chat, Nsukka Elites, went silent. Ebuka later told Nkechi that Chiamaka had left the group entirely, deleting months of messages. More strangely, Chiamaka began quietly correcting rumors whenever they surfaced, defending Nkechi in small, almost invisible ways. A comment here, a correction there. Never loud enough to draw attention, but enough that the whispers about Nkechi slowly began to fade. Nkechi didn't understand it. Part of her wanted to confront Chiamaka, to demand an explanation for months of cruelty followed by this bizarre, unexplained kindness. But exhaustion, relief over her mother's recovery, and the sheer weight of final year academic pressure kept her from pursuing it. Then, 3 weeks before final exams, Chiamaka finally approached her. It was late evening. Nkechi was leaving the library, arms full of borrowed textbooks, when she found Chiamaka waiting outside, alone, without her usual entourage of friends. "Can we talk?" Chiamaka asked, her voice small in a way Nkechi had never heard before. Nkechi tensed, bracing for another cruel remark. "About what?" Chiamaka said, "About everything. About your father, about mine." What followed was a conversation that lasted nearly 3 hours, the two of them sitting on a low concrete wall outside the library as the sky darkened around them. Chiamaka told her everything: the documents she'd found, her father's panic, the private investigator, the anonymous transfer for her mother's hospital bill. Nkechi listened in stunned silence, the pieces of a 5-year-old mystery finally clicking into place. Her father hadn't failed. He hadn't committed fraud. He had been betrayed by the very man he called brother, a man whose daughter had spent the past year mocking his own child for the poverty that betrayal caused. "Why are you telling me this?" Nkechi finally asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. "Because it's not right. Because I spent months mocking you for surviving something my own family caused. Because every time I close my eyes, I see that memo with my father's signature, and I understand that everything I have is built on your family's suffering." She took a shaky breath. "I want to make it right. I don't know how yet, but I want to try." It would have been easy for Nkechi to reject this apology outright, to see it as too little too late, a guilt-driven gesture that didn't undo years of humiliation or 5 years of poverty. And for a long moment, sitting there in the darkening evening, she considered doing exactly that. But then she thought of her father, sitting silently at their old dining table 5 years ago, drowning in a betrayal he never understood. She thought of how badly he deserved the truth before it was too late. And she realized that whatever grudge she held against Chiamaka personally, the real justice she needed wasn't an apology from a 19-year-old girl. It was exposure of the truth to the world that had judged her family so harshly. "I don't forgive you," Nkechi said quietly. "Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But I need that document. I need everything you have. My father deserves to clear his name before he dies believing he failed his family." Chiamaka nodded, tears streaming freely now. "I'll get you everything, I promise." We're approaching the climax now, and trust me, it's not the simple, tidy resolution you might be expecting. There are still secrets left to unravel, and the confrontation ahead is going to test everyone involved. If you've been holding your breath through this story, take a moment, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's finish this together. Getting the documents proved harder than Chiamaka anticipated. Her father, still shaken from her earlier questions, had grown suspicious and secretive,
moving sensitive files to a safe in his private study that Chiamaka had never had access to. For nearly a month, Chiamaka searched for opportunities, growing increasingly desperate as Nkechi's father's health continued its slow decline back in Enugu. Finally, during a weekend when Chief Duru traveled to Abuja for a business summit, Chiamaka found her chance. Using a combination she'd once seen her father use years ago, his late mother's birth year, a detail she remembered from childhood, she managed to open the safe. Inside, she found not just the incriminating memo she'd found before, but an entire folder of correspondence, emails between her father and a corrupt government official, discussing how to manage the fallout and redirect attention from the contract scandal. Bank records showing the movement of funds that should have gone to Obiora Logistics. And most damning of all, a signed confidential agreement between Chief Duru and the official, essentially purchasing his silence and cooperation in framing Ibina Obiora. It was more than enough. It was overwhelming, irrefutable proof. Chiamaka photographed every single page, her hands shaking the entire time, terrified her father would somehow sense what she was doing from 300 kilometers away. She returned the originals exactly as she'd found them, and left without a trace. That night, she sent everything to Nkechi.
Nkechi's father, Chief Obina Obiora, sat in his modest living room, reading through 5 years of stolen justice on her daughter's borrowed phone screen, his hands trembling, tears streaming silently down a face that had aged far beyond its years. For 5 years, he had carried the weight of believing he had failed his family through some flaw of his own, some mistake, some carelessness he couldn't quite identify, but blamed himself for anyway. And now, finally, he understood. It was never his failure. It was betrayal, calculated and cold from a man he trusted like a brother. "We need to take this to the authorities," Nkechi said, sitting beside her father, watching relief and rage war across his weathered face. "We need to clear your name properly, publicly." But here's where the story takes one final, unexpected turn, because pursuing justice against a man as powerful and connected as Chief Emeka Duru was never going to be simple. When Nkechi and her father approached a lawyer with the evidence, they discovered that the statute of limitations on certain fraud charges had complications, that Chief Duru's connections within the state's business and political circles ran deep enough to make any legal pursuit slow, expensive, and uncertain. Justice, real justice, wasn't going to come from a courtroom, not quickly anyway. So Nkechi decided on a different kind of justice, a public one. She was, by this point, in her final semester and had, despite 2 jobs, exhaustion, family crisis, and months of bullying, maintained the highest cumulative grade point average in her entire graduating class. She was set to be valedictorian. The university's biggest, most publicized annual event, broadcast to hundreds of families and alumni, including prominent business figures often invited as guests of honor. Chief Emeka Duru, as a major donor to the university and father of a graduating student, was scheduled to be one of those honored guests. Nkechi requested, and was granted, given her academic standing, the opportunity to deliver the valedictory address. Graduation day arrived on a bright, humid morning in July. The university's main auditorium was packed. Proud parents in their best clothes, professors in ceremonial robes, students glowing with the particular joy of finish lines finally crossed. Nkechi's mother, fully recovered, sat in the front row in her best wrapper, weeping with pride before the ceremony had even begun. Her father, though visibly frail, sat beside her, dressed in an old suit that no longer fit quite right, but that he insisted on wearing. The same suit, Nkechi realized with a lump in her throat, the same suit he had worn to her secondary school graduation, back when he still believed the world made sense. A few rows back, Chief Emeka Duru sat in a place of honor, beaming with pride as his daughter in her graduation gown sat among her classmates, though Chiamaka herself looked pale, tense, glancing repeatedly toward Nkechi with a look that mixed fear and hope in equal measure. She knew what was coming. She had chosen this, but knowing didn't make it any less terrifying. When Nkechi's name was called to deliver the valedictory address, the room erupted in applause. She was, by then, somewhat known on campus, not just for her academic excellence, but for the quiet dignity with which she had endured months of hardship many had witnessed firsthand. She walked to the podium, her hands steady despite the storm inside her, and began speaking. She spoke first about hard work, about waking at 5 a.m. to knead dough before lectures, about closing hotel floors past midnight before opening textbooks by candlelight because hostel electricity failed more nights than it worked. The audience listened, moved, some already wiping away tears. Then she spoke about her father. 5 years ago, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium speakers, my father was one of the most respected businessmen in Enugu State. Then, in the span of 6 weeks, everything he built was destroyed, his name dragged through scandal, his health broken beyond repair. For 5 years, my family believed he had failed us. For 5 years, he blamed himself for a crime he never committed. The room grew quieter, sensing something significant unfolding. Recently, Nkechi continued, I learned the truth. My father didn't fail. He was betrayed, deliberately, calculatedly, by a business partner he trusted like family. A man who redirected blame, forged documentation, and bribed officials to protect himself while my father's name, health, and dignity were destroyed. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Chief Emeka's Duru's smile had frozen on his face, color draining rapidly. I stand here today, Nkechi said, her eyes finding her father's in the front row, watching him grip her mother's hand, not to shame anyone publicly by name, because that is not why I asked for this platform. I stand here to say this. The truth always finds its way to the light, no matter how long it's buried. And to every young person listening who has ever been mocked for working hard, for wearing worn clothes, for surviving circumstances they didn't choose, never let anyone's cruelty define your worth. Sometimes the very people looking down on you are standing on foundations built from your family's ruins, whether they know it or not. The auditorium erupted in applause, thunderous, emotional, many in the audience crying openly, moved by a speech that felt like it carried the weight of something far larger than one girl's graduation. Chief Duru sat frozen, understanding immediately, from the way several people's eyes drifted towards him, that though Nkechi hadn't named him directly, enough people in that room, business associates, old colleagues who remembered the Obiora scandal, understood exactly who she meant. His reputation, built so carefully over 5 years, had just cracked open in front of everyone who mattered to him.
But the true bombshell was still coming. As the applause died down, Nkechi wasn't finished. She reached into the podium, pulled out a folder, and continued. I have here documentation, she said calmly, proving exactly what happened 5 years ago. I'm not releasing it today out of respect for this ceremony and for my fellow graduates whose day this also is. But I want whoever is responsible to know the evidence exists, and it will be delivered to the appropriate authorities and press outlets this week, regardless of any attempt to interfere. It wasn't a threat exactly, it was a promise, delivered with the calm, unshakable dignity of a girl who had survived far worse than social embarrassment. Chief Duru left the auditorium before the ceremony fully concluded, his face ashen, ignoring the concerned whispers of colleagues nearby. Chiamaka did not leave with him. Instead, after the ceremony, as families mingled and took photographs, Chiamaka approached Nkechi's parents directly, her graduation gown still on, her makeup smudged from tears she hadn't bothered hiding. "Sir, Ma," she said to Chief Obiora and Mama Ifelma, her voice trembling. "My name is Chiamaka Duru. I'm the one who helped Nkechi get those documents.
I'm so sorry for what my father did to your family. I'm sorry for how I treated your daughter before I knew the truth. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to hear it from me directly." Chief Obiora studied the young woman before him for a long, heavy moment. The daughter of the man who had destroyed him, standing before him in tears, having risked her own family's stability to give him back his name. Slowly, he extended his hand. "Betrayal," he said quietly, "is not inherited, my dear. Only character is. Thank you for yours." Chiamaka broke down completely then, and to everyone's surprise, Nkechi's mother pulled the girl into a tight embrace, the two of them crying together in the middle of a graduation ceremony that had turned into something far more significant than an academic milestone. In the weeks that followed, the documents were indeed delivered, not to destroy Chief Duru through public spectacle, but through proper legal channels, allowing investigators to build a real case. It would take over a year for the full legal process to unfold, but eventually, Chief Emeka Duru's business empire faced serious scrutiny. Several of his major contracts were revoked pending investigation, and his once untouchable reputation crumbled under the weight of evidence too solid to ignore. Chiamaka, remarkably, chose not to run from the fallout. She used her portion of her grandmother's clean inheritance to help fund proper legal representation for the Obiora family, ensuring Chief Obiora's name was fully, publicly cleared. The two families, against all odds, found an uneasy but genuine peace, not friendship exactly, not immediately, but a mutual respect born from truth finally spoken aloud. Nkechi graduated with the highest honors in her department. Within a year, using scholarship opportunities that opened up once her story, the real story, not the rumors, became known, she secured a position at a respected financial firm in Lagos, determined to help other families navigate exactly the kind of financial devastation and legal betrayal that nearly destroyed her own. Her father, Chief Obi Obiora, lived to see his name restored, his health slowly, gently improving, now that the crushing weight of shame and confusion had finally lifted. Her mother closed her roadside groundnut table for the last time, not because she had to, but because for the first time in 5 years, she didn't have to anymore. And Chiamaka? She changed her course of study the following year, moving from business administration into law, determined, she told Nkechi during one of their increasingly frequent phone calls, to spend her career making sure what happened to the Obiora family could never happen so easily to anyone else again. So here's what I want you to take from this story. The girl mocked for working 2 jobs wasn't weak. She wasn't beneath anyone. She was carrying a truth the world hadn't caught up to yet, and she carried it with the dignity that in the end outshone every designer bag, every black Prado, every cruel whisper thrown her way. And the girl who mocked her? She learnt in the hardest way possible that privilege built on someone else's ruin never truly belongs to you, and that real character shows up not in how much you have, but in what you're willing to do once you learn the truth. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you believe, even for a moment, that truth always finds its way to the light, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Stories about ordinary people carrying extraordinary strength through circumstances that would break most of us. Stories that remind us to be careful who we judge, because you never truly know what someone else is carrying or what truth is quietly waiting just beneath the surface, ready to change everything. Thank you for watching till the end. I'll see you in the next story.